Welcome to my philosophy and socio-economic channel. This video might be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand why so many people surrounded by goods still feel empty, why buying so often fails to satisfy, and why a society of abundance can keep producing new poor people. How can a world overflowing with products still create anxiety, inferiority, and invisible poverty? Why do people keep buying things that lose meaning almost as soon as they arrive? Why does consumption promise freedom, yet quietly turn into a new form of obedience? Why can a person work constantly and still feel poor? Not because they cannot eat, but because they cannot keep up with the required style of life. We must deconstruct the invisible mechanisms of human desire. Chapter 1. The seduction of objects and the first illusion of relief. We spend our entire lives chasing the promise hidden inside a cardboard box, only to discover that the box was always empty. The objects we desperately acquire rarely fulfill the monumental psychological expectations we unfairly place upon them, leaving us staring into the cold void of our own unresolved internal anguish. Consider the strange and familiar psychological journey we experience during every online purchase. We spend hours scrolling through infinite digital aisles, searching for the exact item that promises to resolve our current discontent. When we finally click the purchase button, a profound sense of emotional relief washes over us. We actually believe that our deepest internal problems will be solved by the arrival of a physical object. During the waiting period, while the package is in transit, our minds construct elaborate and beautiful fantasies. We imagine how a simple height-adjustable desk will suddenly cure our chronic procrastination and transform us into relentless working machines. We envision how a specific brand of clothing will instantly elevate our social status and command deep respect from our peers. The anticipation generates intoxicating levels of pure mental dopamine. The pinnacle of this consumer experience arrives the exact second we tear open the cardboard packaging. For one fleeting and glorious moment, the object seems to possess magical properties, shining with the promise of a completely renewed existence. We hold the pristine item in our hands, convinced that we have finally acquired the missing piece of our fundamentally flawed identity. The transaction feels absolutely victorious and completely justified. However, a terrifying psychological phenomenon occurs almost immediately after. The physical possession is secured. The magical aura surrounding the object evaporates with astonishing speed, often dissipating entirely within a single week. The transformative garment becomes just another piece of fabric hanging silently inside an overcrowded and forgotten wardrobe. The magical desk swiftly reverts into merely a flat wooden surface holding scattered papers. The illusion violently shines and then dies. Once the object is stripped of its manufactured fantasy, the heavy burden of mundane reality returns to crush us. The new possession actually begins to dominate our physical space and drain our mental energy. We are left staring at accumulations of depreciating plastic and metal, realizing that our chronic boredom was never cured. The underlying emotional void resurfaces, demanding another immediate dose of artificial consumer stimulation to survive. Modern consumer society is intentionally engineered to prevent the human mind from ever reaching a state of tranquility. The entire economic architecture relies upon the systematic eradication of contentment. If we actually felt satisfied with our current possessions, the colossal engines of global capitalism would grind to a devastating halt. Therefore, the industry must relentlessly manufacture discontent, convincing us that our present reality is unbearably defective and deeply shameful. Within this highly engineered environment, ordinary human boredom has been outlawed and reclassified as a terrifying psychological failure. The market positions itself as the ultimate savior, offering endless novelty as the only permissible cure for a stagnant existence. We are conditioned to believe that happiness requires a continuous sequence of stimulating events and constant material acquisition. The absence of new purchases is now culturally interpreted as absolute personal stagnation. We willingly surrender our irreplaceable time and vital energy, working exhausting jobs just to finance this endless cycle of ephemeral novelty. We exchange the best years of our lives for rapidly depreciating goods that only provide temporary emotional anesthesia. We believe we are purchasing freedom, yet we are actually financing our own invisible imprisonment. We have mastered the art of buying everything except our own genuine inner peace. To break free from this exhausting psychological treadmill, we must first recognize that we are chasing ghosts disguised as merchandise. True contentment can never be extracted from a factory production line or delivered in a sealed shipping box. We must confront the uncomfortable reality that our insatiable desires are not our own, but carefully implanted directives designed to extract our wealth. The game is fundamentally rigged against our solace. The heaviest chains we wear are often forged by the very objects we once believed would set us free. We become tragic servants to our own possessions, endlessly sacrificing our precious human freedom simply to maintain a carefully constructed display of synthetic wealth and artificial identity within an indifferent world. The true tragedy of human desire is not that it cannot be satisfied, but that satisfaction itself breeds a new form of emptiness. Chapter 2. Why Possession Fades So Quickly. When we finally acquire the highly coveted object, a strange and silent transformation occurs within the depths of our consciousness. The intense emotional high generated during the anticipation phase immediately begins to dissipate the moment we assume physical ownership. The psychological distance that once made the item appear magical and transformative has suddenly collapsed. It is no longer a glistening symbol of potential, but merely ordinary matter. Sociologists and philosophers have long observed that the modern consumer society is entirely dependent upon this rapid decay of satisfaction. If a single purchase actually provided permanent joy, the entire economic engine would immediately catastrophically stagnate. Therefore, the structural logic of capitalism demands that our belongings must lose their allure almost immediately after they are acquired. We are chasing a horizon that relentlessly recedes. To ensure this perpetual dissatisfaction, the market intentionally severes the physical product from its actual manufacturing process. We never witness the exhausting human labor, the screaming machinery, or the industrial slaughterhouses that produce our pristine packaged goods. This deliberate distance allows the object to arrive in our hands as an immaculate, isolated entity, purely abstract and readily available for our infinite psychological projections. Yet, because this projection is entirely synthetic, it cannot withstand the mundane reality of daily physical interaction. The magnificent dress simply absorbs perspiration. The expensive smartphone merely delivers frustrating work emails, and the luxury vehicle remains tragically stuck in ordinary commuter traffic. The enormous chasm between the promised fantasy and the depressing reality inevitably generates a profound sense of disillusionment that no object can cure. To mask this inevitable disappointment, the system ingeniously convinces us, that the failure resides within our specific choice, not within the mechanism of consumption itself. We erroneously conclude that we simply purchased the wrong item, the outdated model, or the inferior brand. We inexplicably believe that the next acquisition will finally deliver the permanent fulfillment that every previous purchase so cruelly promised and failed. This exhausting cycle traps us within a state of eternal and unresolvable yearning. We are continually pushed forward not by the genuine usefulness of the items we hoard, but by the terrifying sensation of inner emptiness that always returns. The goods piling up in our homes serve as silent witnesses to our desperation, tragic monuments marking our inability to differentiate genuine needs from wants. We endlessly attempt to fill the deep spiritual void within us by pouring meaningless physical objects into an abyss that demands something entirely different. An object ceases to be a mere tool the moment it is asked to carry the weight of our identity. Chapter 3. From Useful Things to Symbolic Things. Once, human beings acquired objects out of brutal necessity. A coat was purchased to survive the freezing winter, and a simple cup was crafted strictly to hold water. The value of the object was entirely contained within its practical function. But as industrialization conquered scarcity, the fundamental relationship between humans and their material possessions underwent a radical and irreversible mutation. When survival is no longer the primary anxiety, a product must offer something vastly more seductive than mere usefulness. It must transform into a symbol. Consider a bottle of premium mineral water priced at 20 times the cost of tap water. You are no longer purchasing hydration. You are purchasing a meticulously crafted illusion of purity, elite taste, and a refined lifestyle. The brand functions as the invisible architecture of this new reality. It operates as a sophisticated pricing machine that charges us for our own psychological desires. A luxury handbag does not hold your keys any better than a canvas tote. Instead, it acts as a silent megaphone, broadcasting your perceived social rank, your financial triumph, and your desperate demand to be noticed by the crowd. A washing machine is irreplaceable in its basic function of cleaning clothes, but as a symbol of modern comfort and superior living, it becomes instantly replaceable by the next gleaming model. We no longer consume the physical matter. We consume the abstract meaning attached to it. The object itself becomes entirely secondary to the invisible social code it actively represents. This shift from utility to symbol creates a profound vulnerability within the human psyche. Because symbolic value is entirely arbitrary and constantly shifting, we can never truly possess it. The moment we acquire the symbol, the cultural elite subtly changes the code, rendering our expensive purchase obsolete. We are trapped in a perpetual race to buy, meaning only to find our hands completely empty. We have built an entire civilization upon the tragic illusion that a price tag can accurately measure the worth of a human soul. A society will always re-engineer its moral compass to protect its economic survival. Chapter 4. The Birth of Consumer Society. Before the 20th century, the industrial machine was driven by the relentless need for massive production. The dominant philosophy was the Protestant work ethic, which demanded extreme discipline, frugality, and the constant delay of gratification. Citizens were conditioned to believe that diligent labor and restrained spending were the highest forms of moral virtue. The ultimate goal was to accumulate savings and avoid the temptations of unnecessary luxury. However, The unprecedented efficiency of the assembly line eventually created a terrifying paradox that culminated in the Great Depression of 1929. The factories had mastered the art of infinite output, but the exhausted population lacked the financial capacity to purchase the endless flood of goods. The capitalist ecosystem faced utter annihilation, not because it could not produce enough, but because it produced vastly too much. To rescue the floundering global economy, a monumental structural shift occurred under the guidance of Keynesian economic theory. The traditional virtues of thrift and restraint were suddenly reclassified as dangerous obstacles to national prosperity. Governments and corporations realized that survival required the creation of a completely new type of citizen. The dutiful worker had to be surgically transformed into the insatiable consumer. This transformation required a complete reversal of human morality. Hedonism, once condemned as a spiritual sin, was quietly redefined as an essential patriotic duty. Spending money, even on frivolous or unnecessary items, became the supreme act of civic participation. The economic infrastructure was no longer fueled by factory sweat, but by the endless circulation of desire, demanding that everyone must want more than they inherently need. We inherited a world where our primary value to society is no longer what we can skillfully build, but what we are willing to mindlessly destroy through consumption. The machinery of abundance trapped us in a paradox where abstaining from the market is viewed as a threat to civilization. We were trained to cure our manufactured sadness by endlessly purchasing meaningless symbols. True subjugation occurs when the captive is convinced that buying their own chains is an act of rebellion. The most efficient factory in the modern world does not produce physical goods, it produces insatiable yearning. Chapter 5. How Desire is Manufactured. To sustain the monumental output of the post-industrial economy, the fundamental target of commerce had to shift radically. Human needs are inherently biological, finite, and easily satisfied. A person only requires a small amount of food to survive and a simple roof for shelter. Therefore, the market relinquished the business of fulfilling needs and dedicated itself entirely to the infinite cultivation of abstract human desire. The most powerful tool in this new economic arsenal is the relentless imagery projected through global media and ubiquitous advertising. These sophisticated campaigns do not actually sell physical materials. They sell elaborate solutions to deliberately engineered psychological deficiencies. They systematically remind us that we are aging, unattractive, unsuccessful, and dangerously close to social invisibility. The product is merely positioned as the temporary antidote to our newly discovered shame. Perhaps the most brilliant illusion manufactured by consumer society is the deceptive promise of absolute individuality. We are constantly instructed to express our authentic selves and stand out from the ordinary crowd. Yet, we are forced to achieve this supposed uniqueness by purchasing the exact same mass-produced commodities as millions of others. We assemble prepackaged corporate symbols, tragically mistaking a brand catalog for a genuine personality. Furthermore, modern goods are never truly isolated entities. They function as interconnected networks of required consumption. When you purchase a premium smartphone, you are instantly compelled to acquire the compatible watch, the expensive headphones, and associated digital subscriptions. The initial purchase operates as a Trojan horse, inviting an entire ecosystem of required aesthetic accessories into your life. The accumulation relentlessly continues until your surroundings match the commercial aesthetic. We are handed a menu of manufactured dreams and instructed to call it absolute freedom. We are no longer defined by the depth of our character, but by the precise curation of our visible possessions. Chapter 6: Consumption as Identity Performance. In older societies, human identity was relatively fixed by birth, profession, or deep community ties. Today, the complete collapse of these rigid social structures has left us floating in a terrifying sea of anonymity. To anchor ourselves, we desperately construct our public personas using the universal language of commercial brands. We have voluntarily transformed our bodies and our homes into walking billboards for powerful corporate symbols. We constantly observe the extravagant spending habits of the wealthy and mistakenly believe that mimicking their consumption will elevate our own social standing. This creates a tragic and exhausting theater of aspiration. We purchase highly expensive items we cannot truly afford, hoping these objects will act as magical passports into higher social echelons. Yet the elite simply shift their aesthetic preferences the moment the masses catch up. Even those individuals who actively reject mainstream luxury inevitably fall into the exact same psychological trap. A rebellious subculture always requires a very specific uniform to be socially recognized. Whether it is the distressed leather jacket of a punk musician or the minimalist wardrobe of a tech entrepreneur, belonging demands purchasing. Genuine rebellion has been neatly commodified and ruthlessly sold back to us at a premium. This perpetual performance of identity requires an immense and draining amount of capital. We are forced to constantly upgrade our lifestyle merely to maintain our current social position. The paralyzing fear of appearing outdated drives us relentlessly back to the digital storefronts. We are not simply buying clothes or furniture. We are desperately paying the expensive monthly subscription fee to remain socially visible and culturally relevant. When you strip away the expensive logos and the meticulously curated aesthetic, who is the stranger left standing in the mirror? Chapter 7: The New Poor and the Shame of Inadequate Consumption. The cruelest evolution of modern society is that it no longer punishes people for being unable to work. It punishes them for being unable to buy. Historically, the definition of poverty was brutally simple and purely physical. During the peak of the Industrial Revolution, a person was considered poor exclusively if they lacked employment and could not secure enough calories to survive. The societal equation was highly legible. If you willingly entered the harsh factory and labored diligently, you were guaranteed basic sustenance and an acknowledged place within the working-class architecture. However, as the industrial engines became automated and the global system transitioned into a consumer paradigm, the metrics of human value quietly and violently mutated. We entered an era where mere survival is no longer sufficient to claim full human dignity. The standard of normalcy has shifted from the ability to produce goods to the unrestricted ability to consume them, according to continuously changing societal aesthetics. Today, you can possess a stable administrative job, rent a secure apartment, and consume 3 meals a day, yet still find yourself categorized as deeply and inescapably poor. This is because modern poverty is no longer defined by absolute starvation, but by relative social exclusion. You are poor when you cannot afford the socially mandated vacations, the acceptable brand of technology, or the cultural entertainment that your peers effortlessly navigate. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman brilliantly identified this emerging underclass as the flawed consumers. In a world engineered entirely around the act of buying, those who lack the discretionary income to participate in the endless upgrades are stripped of their social legitimacy. You are not simply lacking money. You are categorized as lacking the fundamental competence required to exist properly within a legitimate and recognized modern lifestyle. This exclusion manifests as a profound and paralyzing psychological torment. The pain derives not from an empty stomach, but from the burning shame of total social invisibility. You watch your colleagues and friends effortlessly swipe credit cards and discuss their latest experiential purchases, while you remain trapped behind an invisible glass wall. You are systematically barred from the very rituals that confer dignity and belonging within the human community. To mask the systemic failures that produce this inequality, the consumer architecture brilliantly rephrases poverty as a personal moral failing. When you cannot keep pace with the aesthetic requirements of your social tier, you are taught to internalize the humiliation. The system whispers that your inability to buy the right symbols proves that you are innately inferior, unintelligent, or simply not working hard enough to deserve happiness. Perhaps the most agonizing affliction of the new poor is the crushing weight of unrelenting boredom. In the consumer society, entertainment and recreation are strictly commodified. Every public space is designed to extract wealth, from glistening shopping malls to exclusive digital platforms. If you lack purchasing power, you are denied entry to the theater of joy. You are condemned to a stagnant existence while the shimmering world dances wildly just beyond your reach. In previous centuries, empires solved the problem of excess populations by exporting them to distant colonies, providing a vicious but functioning release valve for domestic tension. Today, the global map is entirely closed. The flawed consumers cannot be relocated to unknown frontiers. They must remain trapped within the urban centers of the very empire that discards them. They become the silent, unwanted spectators of a feast they cannot touch. Faced with this unsolvable demographic problem, the state shifts its strategy from welfare to incarceration. The system no longer attempts to rehabilitate the poor or elevate their purchasing power. Instead, it simply seeks to erase them from public view. Poverty is systematically criminalized, and those who cannot consume legitimately are driven into physical and psychological ghettos, segregated from the glistening shopping districts by invisible but absolute economic borders. When society measures human worth exclusively by purchasing power, those who cannot afford the ticket are no longer considered fully human. Chapter 8: Work without security, consumption without satisfaction. We have created a world where we must rent our own lives by the hour just to afford the illusion that we are truly free. In the shadow of this relentless consumer hierarchy, the fundamental nature of human labor has been violently restructured. During the heyday of industrial capitalism, even the most brutal assembly line offered a twisted form of absolute certainty. A worker traded their physical sweat for a guaranteed position within the collective structure. Employment provided a permanent identity, a predictable pension, and a concrete narrative for one's entire life. Today, the concept of a lifelong vocation has been systematically dismantled and replaced by the terrifying reality of liquid labor. The modern worker is no longer viewed as a vital component of a grand industrial engine, but as a temporary and utterly disposable service provider. We have entered the era of the gig economy, where employment contracts are ephemeral, loyalty is non-existent, and human beings are rented exclusively for the immediate project at hand. This extreme precarity generates a pervasive and exhausting background anxiety that haunts every waking hour. Millions of individuals wake up each morning entirely uncertain if their livelihood will survive the upcoming fiscal quarter. The algorithmic boss can terminate a position with a single automated notification. Yet, despite this terrifying instability, the societal demand to maintain a flawless consumer appearance remains as unforgiving and expensive as ever before. To navigate this brutal paradox, the labor force has been sharply divided into two distinct and deeply unequal realities. On one side exist the privileged few who possess what sociologists call aesthetic work. These are the elite designers, software engineers, and digital creators who find genuine meaning, challenge, and substantial financial reward in their daily tasks. For them, labor blends seamlessly into lifestyle, providing both immense capital and authentic psychological fulfillment. On the other side of the chasm exists the vast majority of the population, condemned to perform labor devoid of any aesthetic value. These are the algorithmic delivery drivers, the warehouse pickers, and the basic administrative staff. Their work is numbing, highly monitored, and entirely stripped of creativity. They do not labor to find meaning. They labor exclusively to extract enough capital to survive the weekend and finance their necessary consumer disguises. The utter cruelty of this divide is amplified by the unrelenting messages of the market. The exhausted delivery driver, whose movements are tracked by satellites to ensure maximum efficiency, is targeted by the exact same luxury advertisements as the venture capitalist. The algorithm bombards the precarious worker with images of high-end vacations and expensive vehicles, constantly reminding them of the glistening world they are barred from entering. Consequently, the primary function of a salary has devolved into a mere defense mechanism against social exclusion. We do not work to build generational wealth or secure true financial autonomy. We work frantically just to pay the monthly subscription fees required to retain our slipping social status. The modern worker is trapped on an accelerating treadmill, sprinting at maximum capacity simply to avoid falling into the abyss of the flawed consumers. We have internalized the delusion that if we simply work a few more hours, accept one more temporary contract, or endure a little more humiliation, we will finally earn enough to purchase permanent security. But the goalpost is intentionally designed to recede symmetrically with our efforts. The moment we can afford yesterday's luxury, the elite discard it, redefining the aesthetic of success and resetting our journey back to zero. The modern tragedy is that we exhaust our finite human energy digging a bottomless pit, desperately hoping it will one day become a mountain. To sustain the illusion of infinite prosperity, we willingly surrender our future freedom in exchange for the temporary anesthesia of borrowed wealth. Chapter 9: Debt, Credit, and the Delay of Pain. For generations, human societies viewed financial debt as a profound moral failing and a terrifying threat to personal autonomy. The traditional working class operated under the strict philosophy that one must only consume what has already been earned through hard labor. Borrowing money was reserved exclusively for absolute emergencies or massive industrial investments, never for frivolous personal indulgence. However, the transition into a consumer society required the complete annihilation of this restrictive financial morality. When the colossal output of post-industrial capitalism collided with the stagnant wages of the ordinary worker, the entire economic machine faced an existential crisis. The market demanded continuous and exponential growth, but the masses lacked the actual liquid capital, to purchase the relentless flood of new goods. To prevent a catastrophic societal collapse, the financial sector engineered a brilliant and devastating solution: the democratization of consumer credit. The introduction of the credit card and the modern installment plan radically altered the psychological landscape of human desire. These financial instruments magically erased the natural boundary of actual affordability, allowing the exhausted citizen to consume vastly beyond their physical means. The ultimate friction of the marketplace, the immediate pain of surrendering hard-earned cash, was surgically removed and replaced by the frictionless swipe of plastic. The architecture of modern debt relies upon a profound manipulation regarding how human beings perceive and value time. By completely severing the immediate pleasure of acquisition from the deferred agony of actual payment, the system short-circuits our rational defenses. You experience the intoxicating thrill of unboxing a premium device today, while the severe financial consequence is banished to a vague, abstract future that your brain willingly chooses to ignore. We fall victim to a severe cognitive bias, erroneously believing that the future version of ourselves will somehow possess infinite resources and flawless discipline. We unload our current status anxiety onto this imaginary future self, forcing them to pay the heavy price for our present insecurities. But the future arrives with terrifying speed, bringing with it the crushing reality of compounding interest and relentless monthly minimum payments. This invisible credit ecosystem functions as a highly efficient and ruthless mechanism of deep social discipline. Historically, rulers controlled populations through the explicit threat of physical violence or direct state coercion. Today, that overt oppression has been replaced by the silent and voluntary chains of personal debt. When you finance a lifestyle you cannot truly sustain, you automatically surrender your sovereign freedom to the corporate structure. A heavily indebted worker is the ultimate compliant citizen. They will never dare to rebel against unfair labor conditions, demand higher wages, or refuse humiliating corporate directives. The paralyzing fear of defaulting on their lifestyle loans keeps them tethered to their desks, enduring endless exploitation strictly to service their mounting financial obligations. True rebellion is mathematically impossible when you are desperately trying to avoid bankruptcy. Furthermore, the consumer society brilliantly rebrands this financial enslavement as a mark of supreme social trust and personal empowerment. We are culturally encouraged to view high credit limits as concrete proof of our value and success within the system. We proudly carry premium credit cards intentionally designed to look like precious metals, blind to the reality that they are simply the instruments of our own extrication. In reality, we have become perpetual tenants, operating within the confines of our own carefully cultivated lives. We do not actually own the gleaming vehicles we drive, the branded garments we wear, or the homes we decorate. We simply rent the temporary permission to display them. Our entire identity is mortgaged, built upon a fragile foundation of borrowed capital that can be demolished by a single economic downturn. The ultimate tragedy of this financial architecture is that it never actually solves the root discontent. It merely defers the inevitable psychological collapse. The intense joy extracted from borrowed consumption decays with astonishing speed, often vanishing entirely within weeks. But the underlying financial debt compounds relentlessly in the shadows, demanding sustained sacrifice long after the object itself has become obsolete and discarded. The consumer is left carrying the heavy financial corpse of a joyous moment that perished years ago. They are trapped in a devastating cycle of retroactive regret, forced to sell their present labor to pay for the fleeting illusions of their past. The global economy now fundamentally relies upon this deliberate mortgage of human potential, ensuring the wheels of commerce spin endlessly upon the friction of unresolved anxiety. We willingly sacrifice the unwritten chapters of our future simply to disguise the intolerable emptiness of our present. A society that banishes boredom ultimately condemns its citizens to a state of perpetual psychological exhaustion. Chapter 10: Boredom, Comparison, and the Endless Renewal of Desire. In previous centuries, the rare and quiet moments of human boredom were understood as a natural state of physical and mental stillness. They provided essential pauses for deep internal reflection, spiritual consolidation, and the slow maturation of authentic human thought. However, the modern consumer apparatus has radically reclassified this natural silence as a terrifying psychological failure. To feel unstimulated is now considered a severe personal deficit that must be immediately and aggressively cured through the instant acquisition of new goods or commodified entertainment. We have entirely lost the fundamental human capacity to sit silently within an empty room and simply exist. The exact moment a gap appears in our daily schedule, a paralyzing anxiety compels us to reach for our glowing digital devices. We willingly immerse ourselves in infinite streams of curated information, desperately searching for fleeting novelty to anesthetize the uncomfortable sensation of existing. Without an immediate commercial purpose, the market brilliantly transforms this underlying existential dread into relentless and profitable purchasing behavior. Consumerism dictates that the only acceptable version of a happy life is one filled with a continuous sequence of stimulating events and rapidly changing possessions. It operates on the cruel principle that before a specific desire can ever be fully calmed and digested, a completely new and urgent desire must be artificially sparked within the mind. We are deliberately prevented from experiencing satiation because true satisfaction is the absolute enemy of the assembly line and the digital storefront. Those who actively choose to step off this accelerating treadmill, whether through voluntary frugality or enforced poverty, face severe cultural condemnation. Individuals who save their capital and resist the siren call of endless upgrades are frequently labeled as rigid, miserly, and fundamentally out of touch with modern reality. The system brands them as defective components in the societal machine, openly mocking their refusal to participate in the mandated theater of perpetual novelty. For the new poor, this eradication of boredom becomes a specific and highly targeted form of psychological torture. When entertainment and joy are exclusively found within the walled gardens of commercial spaces, those without purchasing power are violently locked out. Consider the exhausted, unemployed individual confined to a cramped apartment, utterly paralyzed by a form of boredom that feels more oppressive than physical hunger. They crave the simple dignity of participating in the active world, but cannot afford the cost of admission. This perpetual need for external stimulation is ruthlessly weaponized through the modern architecture of peer comparison. In the distant past, a citizen only compared their material success to their immediate physical neighbors within a confined geographic radius. Today, ubiquitous global digital platforms have placed the entire human population under a state of continuous, exhausting lateral surveillance. We are forced to watch hundreds of acquaintances relentlessly broadcast their highly edited, aesthetically flawless consumer triumphs around the clock. The brutal reality of this manufactured competition is that the imagined finish line does not actually exist within the physical world. The very moment you finally sacrifice enough labor and capital to acquire the deeply desired symbol of success, the cultural elite arbitrarily alters the underlying aesthetic code. The premium digital device becomes culturally obsolete in 12 short months, and the exclusive vacation destination quickly devolves into a mundane and mocked cliché. Human desire is intentionally engineered to be an infinitely renewable corporate resource. Consequently, the physical act of buying is no longer motivated by the genuine, innocent pursuit of personal joy. It has tragically degraded into a desperate defensive maneuver executed against the looming threat of total social obsolescence. We reluctantly swipe our credit cards and drain our finite resources not to achieve lasting happiness, but merely to alleviate the suffocating panic of being left behind by the accelerating herd. We are running an exhausting marathon simply to maintain our current fragile position. How can a human being ever find genuine peace when the environment requires them to constantly purchase the right to feel normal? We have allowed the market to hack our primal need for social belonging, transforming our deepest insecurities into the primary fuel for global economic expansion. We continue to swipe, click, and consume, terrified of the silence that might force us to actually confront the vast emptiness echoing within ourselves. We sprint relentlessly toward an imaginary horizon, tragically blind to the fact that the track itself is moving backward. A society that replaces physical barriers with price tags creates a prison where the inmates happily pay rent for their own cells. Chapter 11. Class Performance, Lifestyle Theater, and Symbolic Violence. In previous eras, social class was rigidly defined by birthright or the physical ownership of vast lands. The boundaries were violently enforced. Today, however, the visible architecture of class has become highly fluid and entirely dependent upon continuous, exhausting performance. We step onto the stage of modern lifestyle theater every morning, utilizing expensive consumer goods as our primary theatrical props to convince an indifferent audience of our inherent social worth. This phenomenon first emerged when the newly wealthy bourgeoisie desperately sought validation from the established aristocracy. Because they lacked noble titles, they utilized physical property to aggressively display their elevated status. The domestic living room transformed from a functional space into a highly curated museum of wealth, deliberately filled with useless but expensive artifacts like imported porcelain. The sheer uselessness of these objects became the absolute proof of their immense financial power. Today, the elite dictate the rules of this global theater through a silent phenomenon known as symbolic violence. They meticulously establish a specific aesthetic, such as minimalist architecture or quiet luxury garments, encoding it as the definitive standard of human decency. Those who cannot afford to accurately replicate this constantly shifting aesthetic face immense psychological humiliation. They are subtly branded as vulgar, uneducated, and entirely unworthy of serious social consideration. The anxious middle class serves as the most desperate and exhausted actors upon this socioeconomic stage. They earn just enough capital to participate in the performance, but never enough to actually own the theater. They willingly drain their bank accounts, purchasing entry-level luxury vehicles and heavily branded accessories. living in constant fear of slipping backward. Their entire existence becomes a frantic effort to mask their financial precarity beneath premium logos. The cruelest mechanic of this lifestyle theater is that the game is intentionally rigged to ensure the masses never achieve permanent victory. The very moment the lower classes successfully save enough capital to imitate a specific cultural trend, the elite instantly abandon it. The aesthetic goalpost is ruthlessly and silently moved to a new location. A design once marking extreme exclusivity is instantly reclassified as vulgar the moment it becomes accessible. Even those who actively believe they are rebelling against this system are effortlessly absorbed into its logic. Every subculture, whether it involves the distressed leather of an underground musician or the hyper-casual attire of a tech billionaire, requires a specific uniform to be socially recognized. Belonging absolutely demands purchasing. The system brilliantly commodifies our desperate need for tribal connection, forcing us to buy our way into social acceptance. The most effective form of social control is convincing the marginalized that their exclusion is merely a result of their own bad taste. To break the spell of the consumer illusion, we must first survive the brutal clarity of waking up. Chapter 13. The Possibility of Deillusionment. For decades, we have willingly resided within a beautifully constructed mirage, believing that abundance would automatically deliver inner peace. The consumer society has successfully convinced us that every emotional void, every frayed relationship, and every existential doubt can be cured by the strategic acquisition of the right physical object. However, the moment we finally acknowledge that this promise is mathematically and psychologically impossible, the de-illusionment begins. This awakening is rarely a joyous event. It is usually accompanied by a profound sense of disorientation and grief. When you suddenly strip away the magical aura from the premium coffee, the luxury handbag, or the latest smartphone, you are left staring at ordinary beans, processed leather, and glass. The symbols lose their staggering power, leaving you naked in a world that suddenly feels coldly transactional and utterly meaningless. The modern phenomenon of knowledge commodification perfectly illustrates our desperate attempts to buy back our own sanity. We purchase expensive online courses and exclusive memberships, falsely believing we are acquiring wisdom. In reality, the vast majority of these digital products remain unwatched. We are not actually buying education. We are desperately purchasing a temporary anesthesia for our deep anxiety, attempting to consume our way out of the consumer trap. De-illusionment requires us to radically sever the arbitrary connection between a physical commodity and our inherent human worth. We must actively refuse to let a multinational corporation dictate the validity of our existence through a carefully engineered price tag. When you stop believing that an expensive vehicle accelerates social trust, or that a specific brand of clothing grants intellectual superiority, the entire theatrical architecture begins to crumble. This process also demands a brutal re-evaluation of how we spend our most irreplaceable resource, which is time. When we understand that a $50,000 upgrade only buys a fleeting moment of social approval, we begin to see the staggering cost of the labor required to finance it. We realize we have been exhausting our finite biological lifespan simply to sponsor the endless growth margins of nameless shareholders. Breaking free does not mean we must retreat into absolute asceticism or live in deliberate poverty. It simply means shifting our consumption back to the realm of genuine utility. A washing machine can simply wash clothes. It does not need to represent elite taste. A car can simply transport a body. It does not need to serve as a loud, rolling billboard desperately announcing our status to indifferent strangers. As we gradually dismantle the invisible network of symbolic meanings embedded in our possessions, we reclaim the vital energy previously stolen by endless status anxiety. The relentless urge to constantly upgrade mutates into a deep appreciation for durability and function. We stop chasing the ephemeral dopamine spike of the unboxing video, seeking instead the quiet, unmarketable solace found outside the relentless surveillance of the global digital marketplace. True wealth is not measured by the things we accumulate, but by the artificial desires we finally have the courage to reject. True liberation begins the exact moment we stop asking the market to define our worth. Chapter 14. The Ethics of Restraint, Clarity, and Inner Sufficiency. In a world that relentlessly demands continuous purchasing, the most radical act of rebellion is cultivating an attitude of deliberate restraint. When we consciously choose to step away from the accelerating cycle of artificial upgrades, we reclaim the vital energy that the system desperately needs to survive. This is not a call for punishing poverty, but a plea for absolute psychological clarity. The philosophy of inner sufficiencies requires us to dismantle the extravagant symbolic values attached to our everyday objects. We must learn to appreciate a garment strictly for its warmth and a vehicle exclusively for its mechanical function, stripping away the invisible social premium. By refusing to pay the exorbitant tax on vanity, we instantly demobilize the most powerful weapons of the consumer architecture. This shift radically redefines our relationship with our own time and labor. If we no longer need to finance an exaggerated theatrical performance of wealth, the crushing pressure to endure meaningless or exploitative work begins to dissipate. We cease to be anxious participants in a rigged socio-economic competition, evolving instead into autonomous individuals who protect their mental bandwidth from corporate encroachment. Finding value outside, the market demands that we reconnect with experiences impervious to commodification. The deep satisfaction of genuine human connection, the quiet contemplation of nature, and the pursuit of authentic intellectual growth possess no price tag and produce no corporate profit. Because these experiences cannot be mass-produced or sold through installment plans, the system systematically devalues them, promoting expensive distractions instead. Ultimately, restraint is not about depriving ourselves of joy. It is about protecting our capacity for genuine satisfaction. It is the quiet recognition that a society built entirely upon infinite expansion and insatiable human yearning is a house of cards destined for structural collapse. We forge a new ethical foundation by insisting that our humanity cannot be measured by our daily purchasing power. A mind untangled from the web of commerce becomes the ultimate fortress against manufactured despair. When the allure of the market finally dissipates, we are left to confront the naked reality of our own human existence. Chapter 15. What remains when the symbol loses its spell? As someone who has spent years managing an industrial factory and operating heavy manufacturing lines, I have witnessed firsthand the profound difference between genuine utility and fabricated desire. The massive cold storage facilities and insulated polyurethane panels we meticulously construct are engineered for absolute survival, serving the fundamental needs of society rather than the frivolous whims of fleeting fashion. When you understand the tremendous physical labor and complex engineering required to bend raw steel and compress chemical foam into functional infrastructure, the modern consumer economy begins to look deeply absurd. We pour astonishing amounts of global energy and irreplaceable human sweat into manufacturing fragile plastic commodities and fast fashion garments that are intentionally designed to disintegrate within a single season. The moment the invisible spell of symbolic value is broken, the entire world visually transforms before our eyes. We suddenly recognize that a supermarket is not a temple of absolute freedom, but a highly calculated processing plant designed to extract our hard-earned capital. The gleaming luxury vehicles trapped in urban traffic are no longer status symbols, but merely expensive mobile cages. Stripped of our acquired branded identities, we are forced to rebuild sense of self from the ground up. We must discover who we actually are when we are no longer defined by the specific expensive logos we wear or the trendy electronic devices we desperately clutch. This process is frightening because it requires confronting the deep internal emptiness we previously tried to buy away. Yet, this frightening vulnerability is the absolute prerequisite for achieving authentic human liberty. When we cease trying to purchase belonging through the theater of consumption, we can finally begin to forge genuine connections based on shared humanity rather than shared purchasing power. We reclaim our sovereign time, refusing to trade the best decades of our lives to service endless monthly credit card minimums. Ultimately, the greatest threat to the global hegemony of consumerism is not a violent political revolution, but a quiet cultural awakening. It is the silent decision by millions of exhausted individuals to simply stop participating in the manufactured rat race. When the flawed consumers realize their exclusion is not a defect but an opportunity for liberation, the engine of debt instantly loses its power. We must radically shift our perspective from the relentless accumulation of matter to the deep cultivation of the human spirit. True wealth resides in a resilient mind that cannot be manipulated by fear, a healthy body that does not require artificial chemical stimulation, and a peaceful conscience that remains entirely impervious to the shallow judgments of an anxious and highly commoditized society. If this deep exploration into the socio-economic architecture of consumerism and poverty has brought you genuine value, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. We will relentlessly continue to decode the invisible systems and hidden psychological mechanics that secretly shape our global reality, empowering you to navigate this complex world with absolute clarity and intellectual freedom. As we quietly conclude this extensive journey through the labyrinth of human desire, I leave you with one final and urgent question to deeply ponder. Look closely at the countless objects currently surrounding you in your room and ask yourself honestly, are you truly living a meaningful life, or are you merely consuming your way through a carefully managed state of anxiety? A soul not for sale can never be bankrupted by the market.